Hey, this is Arthur Zaczkiewicz from Corner of Fifth Street Talk. Got a really good guest coming up next on our show. It's Adam Baruchowitz, who's the co-founder and chief recycling officer at Return to Vendor. And he's all about circularity. He says that we should be taking a systems approach with everybody on board, and from whether it's design, sourcing, and end of product use. He wants to take a linear system and kind of close the loop and make it a better world. So check it out. Hi, and welcome to Corner Fifth Street Talk. My name's Arthur Zaczkiewicz, and this is the show where we gather insights from industry experts, executive leaders, pioneers in fashion apparel, sustainability, retail technology, beauty, and more. Thanks for joining us. Before we start, I want to thank our underwriter, Corner of Fifth, a full-service content creation, marketing, and design studio that believes in the power of storytelling. Learn more at Corner Fifth Studio. Today, we welcome Adam Baruchowitz, who's, I love your hair. You know,
I was going to say, it's almost as hard as Zaczkiewicz, right? Like I said.
I have all my hair. It's not, it's in the closet, in the shoebox. Everyone is numbered. So I am envious. Looks great.
Mine's trying to leave me too. It's a foam over, you know what I mean? Like there's the comb over and then there's the foam over.
So Adam is, you're the co-founder and the chief recycling officer at the Return to Vendor, RTV. And you're also the founder and CEO of Wearable Collections, which I remember when I was working at WD back in the day. So welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a long journey.
Let's talk a little bit about that. But first, tell us about RTV.
Yeah, RTV, is an evolution of this life's work of Wearable Collections. Like I don't really think RTV would have come out without, the 20 years experience with Wearable Collections, being a very front-end collector of used clothing in New York City. And it's basically an evolution of those learnings and the problems within the recycling world, and my knowledge and learning about the concepts of circularity that have driven me to RTV, which is basically a circular materials platform based on the utility of just one material, monomaterial design ethos. And that material is recycled nylon, which is basically nylon is ubiquitous in the environment and fishing nets and different post-industrial use cases, and it's already recyclable. And that's basically why we've started that. And we have a science team at Return to Vendor that's working on adding performance to this basic recycled nylon to lift performance and give it properties that it's never had before, while always keeping recyclability in mind.
Let's talk about circularity for a second. I was reading some existential philosopher, Jaspers, and he said that philosophers, they go out looking for answers, right, and raising questions, and it's always on the horizon. But when you get to that horizon, there's like another horizon. And I feel the same way with circularity. Like, people have been talking about it for a long time, but we never seem to get there. Like, what's the holdup? What's the problem here?
That's a funny thing you just said that, because my neighbor just called me like a guy like in the forest, like with a sickle, just keep on like chopping down, which is like a similar kind of thing. He's like, I'm just love that you're like always at it. When I come home excited from like a recycling expo or something like that. So circularity and recycling in general, I'm going to say, is typically been basically a band-aid to a broken industry. And so for me, it's where circularity is not like an end point. It's a where you begin point. And so if you don't have the intent and design intent, and then the commitment to steward through the entire system and want those materials back at the end of life, you're not going to have circularity. So, when you hear a circularity, the problem is what people, in my mind, and like, remember, I'm just one person, who has opinions, when it comes to circularity, people are talking about one thing, resale, or they're talking about refurbishment. They're talking about one, and there's a reason that RTV is looking at this holistic approach, seeing this from 30,000 feet, and really having our tentacles in each of these kind of spokes of the wheel. It's because really that's what circularity requires in my mind. And so we're thinking about sourcing, we're thinking about, design with monomaterial design ethos. We have connected the dots through, it's basically like a strategic like integration of a supply chain that can work with this material and lift it. And then, we want the materials back at the end of life. so that we can use it as future feedstock. So to me, that's what is required of circularity. And we're talking about a linear system that currently exists where we, harvest, process, manufacture, and are very fine with that entering landfills, maybe with a little bit being recycled. You know what I mean? And so circularity is a system change. It's not it's like an entirety. So one off, it's really hard for the economics to make sense. And so if you ask me first and foremost, why not? It's just the economics around it. I go to textile recycling expos and, you know, fashion and the apparel industry is like a multi-trillion-dollar industry, yet like people are so excited when someone throws like $1 million into the mix. And it's like, you can't fix this industry. Like this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar investment if we really, want to fix and many, many billions. So, you look across to different industries and it's just like, what's required to actually lift them and get them into, the next horizon, as we say. It's investment first and foremost, and commitment to that investment to actually see it through.
So, when you're talking about closing the loop, it's linear now, closing the loop, but how do you do that when we have like fast fashion, that we have an industry that just churns out so much product and, we can't get ahead of it. It seems in my mind, like, I have a radical idea I'll share with you. Like, let's
Please.
close the factories in China for 6 months until we use all that stuff up. And then they'll create more demand for like other products and force people to kind of be used and refurbish and et cetera. But that's not
I think you could only say that because the excesses that exist currently, and so that's part of, that's what I'm saying. We're working within the confines of a broken model in the first place, right? Like,
right.
I mean, I think without going too in depth, like I've been a recycler, for 20 years, right? Just like a front end recycler, but because it's in New York, the fashion capital of the world, and the highest form of recycling is reuse, and would have loved to have my hands on the waste of the fashion industry because that's the highest value. That would be the highest value in the recycling world is this excess. And so, I mean, I'm not an expert on the fashion industry, but I do know that the model builds in lack of sell-throughs.
Yeah.
And different kind of diminishing values from like retail to, the TJ Maxx's of the world. And so all of this is built into like returns as well, so there's all these factors that are built into their broken model that like cutting through that, and the corporate model itself to me is the biggest challenge. I do think we have enough materials in existence, and that's what circularity kind of is trying to, fight basically, is that just maybe we have all the materials we need in existence floating around already. And so it does take things like rare metals in China issue, to think maybe we need to figure this out in America. So there are some, definitely, like I'm with you on the near shoring of ideas for resiliency and all these kind of things. But frankly, there are some things that are coming from these newer fashion. I'm one who can pick and choose, like there are some things that are like, I'm not a super fan of Shein, but like, there's something about their on-demand utilizing modernity and the tools that we have in a modern world to take away from that sitting on inventory excesses and projecting out into the future. That's part of the broken current fashion model that I like. So I think it's taking advantage of the modern tools we have and some of the modern models that we have that really work, and kind of, coalescing them into, a future proofing of using materials in the most efficient manner, taking responsibility for those materials and re-injecting them into the future because we're taking responsibility for them and not putting them in landfills.
So, and, I think an important part, just my perspective is the consumer, like consumer awareness and getting them on board. I used to work as a daily newspaper reporter back in the 90s. And I remember I read somewhere that like Japan was recycling back then 85% of material. And I was like, wow. So I did this thing. I carried around my trash, right? So I had this big trash bag, and anything I produced that was weight that was like going to be in the garbage, that wasn't compostable. I put in a
Yeah.
bag and I carried it around for a week. It was huge. I ended up with 2 huge bags, and it was a real eye opener for me. It's like how much trash I produce,
Yeah.
and it was a game changer. But it's hard, getting consumers on board to understand like exactly like the returns, for example. That's a great example of most returns end up in landfills, right?
I mean, and it's only been exaggerated by COVID, right? Because e-commerce kind of like totally jumped and one person in the industry does it and has success and they say free returns and then everyone followed. They're stuck in this model of like people buying on, trying on, and deciding whether they like things, and that's like highly inefficient, wasteful. It depends like what quality these items come back as returns. I mean, there are some that just go back on the rack as like grade A, like ready for resale at e-commerce. But, there's some that are slightly damaged or stained or whatever, and yeah, they need people like me to figure out what the best next use case is. So, yeah, I mean, that's a problem. I mean, there's a dual, I would say, educational, as we're offering return to vendor to the biggest brands in the world as a turnkey circularity solution. So on the one hand, you know, we deal with educating, the corporations that deal with it on a front. And frankly, you'll deal with, some of the problems that I've come in like, the years of return to vendors experience is just even corporations, fashion corporations you're dealing with silos, you're dealing with design, you're dealing with source, like, and they have their own budgets and so even getting them all on board at the same thing, they have their own butting heads of like what they should do, merchandising and all. And so like I'm just learning that because I never worked in one of those firms before, so I'm learning that like now through return to vendor. So there's an educational process on the corporate side, and then you'll have the corporations tell you the consumer's not interested.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, because you're not providing them with really great options. There's a greenwashing aspect of it. Maybe the consumer can see through the BS, and it's like, so for me, one of the missing dots is that marketing is never really brought into these conversations as far as innovation. And that's where there's gigantic budgets. I think in corporations, I mean, they have gigantic marketing budgets. They're used to spending a lot on advertising and marketing. And to me, being truly responsible would be a welcomed thing by customers. And there's some of that marketing dollars needs to be shifted into sustainability. You're talking to like sustainability departments that basically have no budget.
Right.
Basically, there's no such thing as a circularity department yet. So there's a couple of characters in each company that are concerned about it, and they have to convince every department of this. And I'm talking about the biggest, biggest fashion companies in the world, retailers in the world that have, that make billions of dollars. But like they have a 2-person circular department, like whatever. So the problem runs deep, and I'm not a big fan of blaming the consumer because there's a lot to take in. I'm a consumer myself. I know what it's like. Like you want the companies to provide you with healthier things. You want the government to provide you with the service. It's a lot to ask for everyone to care about everything.
So let's go back to the your monomaterial thesis and model. Let's say I'm a brand, right? Design a brand, whatever, or ready to wear, whatever, activewear. What do I have to do? What do I need to change if I want to work with you from a design and a sourcing process? If I want to be more circular and work with you guys?
I mean, some of the times it's like the simplest tweaks ultimately. So we do have the ability to source fishing nets. We have the ability to recycle those fishing nets. The reason we started with nylon is that when not contaminated, nylon is recyclable. It's already a preferred material. If you look at like the like Euro eco design, it's already considered a preferred material because it's already in the marketplace as an established, you know, well-known material. And so our original thesis, and one of my co-founder, Gangartha Yogi Kamath, has been working with nylon with the U.S. military for different kind of projects in his previous companies, and he's the one who convinced me that nylon is the one to start with. And I've been obsessed with circularity, and he convinced me that there's opportunities and it's in ubiquity and all these things are true, that it is recyclable already when not contaminated. So I was like, okay, well, what products can be made with it? And it turns out a lot. And so with simple tweaks, like why do they combine? And like if people don't want to think about this, and nor do I think they should all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it takes a deep dive to think about like that nylon tote that has a polyester thread. It's like, but that thing makes it not recyclable. So why not just use a nylon thread? So like this is why? Because companies don't care about circularity. That's not the, it's like the polyester might be a cheaper thread or whatever that might be for whatever I can't speak to all the reasons it hasn't been done in the past. You know what I mean? But what I think is that there's crawl, walk, run scenarios, and there's situations where circularity makes a lot of sense to start with, and where the economics can come into play sooner by being a more like there are more closed loop systems. So fashion is not the easiest system, but if you think about a hospital, or you think about uniforms, or you think about youth sports, where there are more closed loops, where, you know, they're constantly growing. And, you know, so I think there are some places that make more sense, but fashion would be sort of the volumes are there. And, you know, the marketing calling card of circularity is more likely to come from the fashion world than a uniform company. It has greater reach. So, yeah, I would say you could start with the simple tweaks, just to go back to your question, you know, and then we have a science team. So there are some products that just like a simple tweak would make sense. Like, why not put nylon buttons on it? How about a nylon label instead of a polyester label? Like, why are you combining? So the initial ethos and the idea came from, maybe I should circle back to that, is that I've been handling clothes for, 20 years. And so the reuse of secondhand is the economic driver of clothing collections, right? And that's where but that secondhand only makes up about 50% of what you collect from any untouched, what they call in the industry, a credential bag of clothing. So I never go through the clothing that I collect. I just a front end, I put it on a truck hyper efficiently. I place bins inside of buildings. I collect it at the New York City Green Markets. I have a great partnership with the New York City Green Market program. That's a pop-up every weekend. And so this is a very highly efficient collection system. It goes on a truck and it goes to the sorting facility on a Monday morning. And basically at that point, it's off my hands, but I work with sorting facilities that I trust and are a very respectable sorting facility. They're the ones who open the bags, grade the materials into its different, hundreds of grades of materials, from men's, women's, children's, to summer, winter, outerwear. So like there's all these different grades, and then there's quality of grades. And so that 50% that's reusable as secondhand as is the economic driver. That's what they can make money from. So this is all market driven all along the way.
So
that other 50, just the other 50% is either going to be used as rags. 25% is going to be used as rags. White t-shirts that are stained, or different cotton t-shirts that are stained, can be used in the rag industry, which has been diminished with plastic getting into the mix, microfiber rags that are competitive with this rag industry. And then the other 20% can be shredded into different types of fiber products like shoddy, insulation, cushioning, mattressing, all these different applications where it's considered, in the past, downcycling, but it's turned into a durable material that replaces virgin materials. But the thing is, there's no value to that. So without understanding the economics of all of this, it's cool that it's being reused, but those processors or the shredders that are going to turn it into shoddy will basically take it off the sorter's hands at little to no price, because they can process and turn it into a usable product, but they'll pay the shipping, and shipping costs money. Like moving materials around costs money, but they really pay. What they do is save the sorting facilities. They save them the cost of landfilling it, which, when you're a commercial business and dealing in the millions of pounds, can be upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 a month.
Right.
They're saving them. So that's real money that they're saving them. So that's the world I grew up in, is like learning that from the back end. So quite often we say return to vendor. is reverse engineering how apparel should be made, thinking about the end of life at the
At
beginning
the
phase.
beginning, yeah.
So why did we start this? When I heard about circularity maybe 10 years ago, like you have the frustrations about why circularity hasn't happened, and just became obsessed. It's common sense. Like, I think it's the answer for everything. I hate to say, like, I really literally think circularity is the common sense for everything. And what has kept me in this game for these years is that clothing cannot be commingled with other materials, because obviously it would lose value right away. If you can't really put a glass bottle, shards of glass won't be good with a sweater. So it has to be kept separate. But waste management is very formulaic. That's what I've learned over these 20 years. So it's efficient dot connecting to the processors, and hopefully there's another product to be made in that next phase. So it can't be commingled. But one of the things, as I collected clothes at farmer markets, and I did a lot of the collections myself. I drove many truckloads and all these things, very firsthand knowledge, of all of these items. People will give you a bag, and in a sense, they're giving me money in a way, because that's my business. But at the same point, we'll say, bless you for what you're doing. And to me, there's a harnessing of that feeling of doing good financially, maybe into the future for me and others, while doing well for society, right? It's that combo. And that's really what I believe a circular future could be, is utilizing resources more efficiently, which obviously has all these ancillary effects of less energy going into it, education of all these to other materials. Like, I've placed bins inside of buildings. I don't know whether I was the first. I believe I was very early on in 2004
Yeah.
to place bins inside of buildings. And I've seen that program copied by e-waste. I've seen it copied by composting. We started collecting at the farmers market way before they started composting at the farmers market. But that I saw that confidence that people will bring their waste to the farmers market grow into, many millions of pounds of compost. It gives the confidence. So I see how waste management is formulaic, and that's what's kept me. I believe that textiles, fashion, and has, if we do this right with this, it can have tremendous sort of residual rippling effects into the future with other materials as well.
Uh, so
Sorry for that long try.
no, that was good. We're out of time, but I'm going to ask you one more question. Usually we ask, what does fashion or retail mean to you? I'm going to ask you, on a personal level, what does recycling mean to you?
Well, I'm going to say that recycling, as I want to separate circularity from recycling. For me, recycling is a band-aid on broken industry, and it's gotten too commingled with that. People say recycling is broken. I don't know how many headlines I've seen is recycling is broken. It's because there's not a collaboration behind sourcing, design, industry, and recycling. So for me, I would like to see the evolution from recycling into circular theory, thought, and in practice, because I believe that circularity takes all the things that people think about recycling and put it into a realistic, comprehensive, effective system that is for the betterment of both the environment and the economics. I think there's tremendous opportunity in this world of AI. I think there's tremendous opportunity in the material intelligence world, where a lot of people are focusing on the artificial intelligence world. I think that circularity is I always say, I want Return to Vendor to be the portal from the linear to the circular world. And because I know the rippling effects that will come from that. So I'd like recycling to be understood into the future as circularity, and circularity having all these things embodied into it.
Adam, thank you so much for your time. That was fascinating. We got to get you back for
Yeah, I'm here. I
another
love
one.
sharing this information.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Street Talk. If today's conversation was useful, the best thing you could do is share it with a colleague. It generally helps us grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. It takes 30 seconds and makes a real difference. For the full episode write-up, show notes, and our weekly newsletter, visit streettalk.studio. We're also on LinkedIn and Instagram at Street Talk Studio. We'll be back next week, and thanks for listening.